קהל נכבד ונבחר ונחמד, כל אלה שנשארו למושב התשיעי לפני האחרון. זה מושב הנשים, המושב התשיעי, אולי בגלל 9 ירחי לידה, אולי בגלל סיבה אחרת, אני לא יודעת. זה מושב מיוחד במינו, שבו תרצנה 3 סופרות מ3 שבטים שונים בעם היהודי, עיראק, מרוקו ותימן. כולן יחד הן הישראליות של היום. כל רומן מוסיף אבן חשובה וזוהרת לתמונת הפסיפס העשירה והמורכבת של עם ישראל, בישראל ובכל אשר הוא נמצא. הסופרת הראשונה היא רויטל, שירי הורוביץ, ילידת ישראל. יש לכם בנספח שחילקתי לכם להרצאתי פרטים יותר רבים על כל אחת מהסופרות, וכדי לא לגזול מזמנן אני אתאר אותן בקיצור, וכל השאר רשום בנספח שלי. אם כן, רויטל שירי הורוביץ, ילידת ישראל, בת להורים יוצאי עיראק שעלו ב-1950. רויטל שירי הורוביץ היא בוגרת 2 תארים בגיאוגרפיה ובספרות עברית, והיה לי הכבוד להיות המורה שלה באוניברסיטת תל אביב ובאוניברסיטאות חיפה ותל אביב. היא כתבה 2 ספרים, בת עיראק שזכרה בפרס עידוד מטעם איגוד יוצאי בבל, והספר השני להתראות בקרוב שיצא לאור לפני כשנה. מי שלא קנה מוזמן לרכוש את הספר במבואה. שירי הורוביץ היא בלוגרית, משוררת ועיתונאית, נשואה ובייחוד אם גאה ל4 בנים, המתגוררת בסיאטל, וושינגטון. בבקשה.
Good afternoon. I'm not that tall. It's actually, okay, I can hold it. Okay, I'm actually going to lecture in English. The reason was I thought it was going to be more convenient for most of us, and we're all going to lecture in English. I'm very thankful to Professor Nurit Govrin for being such a mentor, such an inspiration for me, and she was a wonderful professor, and I learned a lot from her, and I hope I am going to stand up and present so she can be proud of me. Okay, so as Professor Govrin said, I studied Hebrew literature at Tel Aviv University for the master's degree, and I tried to focus on women's studies. At one point, we lived in Zichron Yaakov, and I took classes that focused on women, and I couldn't find stories that spoke about women who came from Arab lands as charismatic, strong, meaningful. I was always finding very not meaningful women, very not standing up for themselves, just really weak women. And I actually never met such women, in my family at least, and I'm sure in other families too. And I remember coming back home that day very, very upset, and said that I have no idea why nobody have ever told our story and told and said what it was really to be an Iraqi woman, even living in Israel or living in Iraq. So I called my aunt, she's a poet and she's an author, and I told her how upset I was, and she said, and I said, somebody has to write this story, and she said, why not you? And I said, I'm not an author. Well, that really stuck to my mind. And she said, you know what, why don't you record me and let's talk about it and see what happens. And I only recorded her once. I went and looked for information, especially about women. And I went, and I only found very small paper written about one of the women who participated in the Jewish underground in Iraq. And I said, okay, I need to actually invent the character and base it on my family. And I started thinking, what kind of way, what am I going to write? Am I going to write a documentary? Am I going to write a fiction? What am I going to write? I thought about it a lot, and I came to the conclusion that if I wrote a documentary, only 5 or 10 people will read it. And actually, I won't be able to teach the history to the people. And I was so right. So I started actually collecting materials about the Jewish holidays, about the historical facts, about the Jewish underground, where my family was involved with, and I'm going to tell you about it a little bit because we spoke a lot, we heard about Jewish history, but actually nobody talked about the Jewish underground. There was a Jewish underground in Iraq, and my uncle was a madrich there, and actually they practiced weapons in my grandfather and grandmother's house. And even if you think about it, how crazy it was, because in that house lived 7 kids. And if they would have been captured, you can imagine what would have happened. I started collecting the facts, and I actually thought about how I'm going to build a story. I thought about the main character for me was this Farida Sasson, who lives in Zichron Yaakov. That's where I lived, and I placed her in the Rakavot. If anyone knows, Rakavot are buildings that you have small apartments that are attached to each other. And for me, she lived there, just in the center of the Rakavot, and she went back in her memory because she was widowed and she was alone, and she went back in her memory, starting to think and remember what happened to her and what happened to her family. And I was able to characterize a person who is very warm, very loving, very giving. And then I thought, okay, who is she telling the story to? And the second character was her niece, who is a student. And she's telling her about the family. Why is she telling her about the family? Because her mom died a few years ago, and her mom actually left a diary that wrote the family story and documented all that happened to that family. I started writing, and in the middle we moved to the US, and that was quite an experience for me as an immigrant, writing about immigrants who happened to be my family. And for me, it was such an experience, very, very, I think I really appreciated them so much more after that, because I thought, okay, I immigrated to the US, okay, my husband went to work for a high-tech company, and I had a nice house, and I had comfortable life. My English was horrible, but still, you know, I had all the tools. I could go and take English classes easily and catch up on my English, and I had money to go and buy groceries, and I could support myself. And I thought about my parents and my family who came from Iraq, from a wealthy, they were wealthy in Iraq, and they came to Israel and started from nothing. They went to Shar Aliyah, and when they first came, not everybody came. My grandfather came with 6 kids, while my grandmother stayed with my uncle, who was a madrich in the underground. He refused to leave Iraq. He said that he cannot do that because he's responsible for other people's life, and he cannot leave Iraq. And my grandmother, who was so smart and strong and meaningful, and I'm going to tell you her story, she said, I'm not going to leave you by yourself because I know what's going to happen. So my grandfather immigrated to Israel by himself, 6 kids. The oldest was 19. The youngest was 2 or 3 years old. And they went to Sha'ar and then they separated them all. 3 of them, my mom who was 17, my aunt who was 19, and the youngest one went to Kiryat Anavim, next to Jerusalem. 2 of them, the middle ones, I think they were 11 and 8, went to Ramat Yochanan, who is next to Afula. And one of them, I have no idea why they chose her to go by herself. She went to Dgania Bet. And my grandfather in the weekends used to go from place to place just to see them. And whenever he could, but they didn't see each other. My grandmother and my uncle stayed in Iraq, and my uncle continued to protect the Jews on the streets like all the other did. And my grandmother would ask him, hey, look, it's been 6 months, it's been 7 months, it's been 8 months. We have to go back. We have to go and see the family. I miss them all. We need to go there. And what happens if they capture you? We're going to die. And he would say, it's not the right time. It's not the right time. So you must know that Jews who decided to leave Iraq had to give up their Iraqi identification and citizenship, right? And they had to get special certificates to be able to immigrate. And it took time. So if you had an emergency, it would be really a problem to go on a plane and leave. My grandmother waited and saw that nothing happens. She decided to go to Chifel and go there. They were living in Baghdad, and she thought that if she would go there and give up their citizenship and get their certificates, my uncle will not know that she did it. And maybe if there comes a time where they will have to leave in a rush, they will be able to do that. So it was Shavuot, Eid al-Ziyara, just before that. And my grandmother told my uncle, who, by the way, oh, okay, I'm not telling you the end yet, but I will tell you, it's a good one. She took her maid with her, and she took the train. It was very brave for a woman to do that with no protection of men. She went to Chifel, and she went to pray on the grave of Nabi Yecheskel, and she gave some money to some people who arranged all the papers. And a few days later, she came back to Baghdad, and she hid the certificates in one of the closets, and that's it. One day, my uncle came very, very pale home and said that 2 people were captured. They were later hanged. And now, that's it. It's the end of both of them, and how could he do such a thing? He was so upset and so sad, but she said, come, 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 come. She took him with her, and she opened the closet, and she showed him the certificates. They left the house immediately and hid in another place, and there were a list of immigrants to leave Iraq. The following day, there was a flight, so they moved some names, and they were safe and sound, and they went to Israel. My uncle later became a very big lawyer in all the north area of Israel. He's now 87, still working, and he's a poet. He writes poetry, and he actually recently lost his wife, and I'm trying to have him tell the story of his life to Peleg, who makes history documented. And I hope one day this will happen to him. I want to tell you about, just a second. The last thing I want to talk about is about the knowledge about the Iraqi communities, and I'm sure it's about the other Arab lands communities, what's happening in the US. And for me, it's really, I was really surprised to see how there is not knowledge nothing, zero, in the schools, in the communities, in Jewish communities. People ask me all the time, I go on lectures in communities, and they ask me, really, there were Jews in Arab lands? And every time I hear that, I'm so shocked and so sad. I don't understand how this happened. And I see really a great role for my fellow authors and for myself to bring the knowledge to communities, not only Jewish communities, to Christian and Muslims, all communities around the US, Canada, everywhere, so they will know that there were Jews in Arab lands, and they will know what happens to their properties, they will know what happens to their lives, they will know what happens to their future later, how everything changed, how they were not able to take their pictures with them even, just their clothes, and that's it. And by the way, they had to give the clothes, my mom had to give hers at the kibbutz, so she never saw it again. So they lost even their clothes, so they had nothing. And I hope that you and I and every person who comes from Arab land, wherever they go, they will tell a story, so people will learn and know about it. And I hope that people will write the stories too, because if it's not on paper, it's gone. It's not going to stay there. My kids are still young. They're not very much interested in what I wrote, but one day, when they're parents, I'm sure they will go back and look for their roots. At least they will have something to read. And at least this book that they will read is not going to be something dry. It's going to be very vivid, and they could maybe characterize and feel that it's close to them. By the way, it's a very, very funny story. I have a friend. She knows the family. When I wrote my book and it was published, she read it and she came to me and she said, oh, is that person is that, and this person is this and this? And I said, no, it's a fictional story. And there is nobody really real there. Everything that has to do with Iraq is true, but the people are fiction. It's not true. She said, oh my God, now I have to go and reread it. Thank you so much.
תודה לרויטל. השאלה הזאת של האם הדמויות היו במציאות או שזה בידיון ספרותי, זאת השאלה הקבועה וחוזרת ברומנים בדיוניים וברומנים דוקומנטריים ובדוקו-רומן, והתשובות הן התשובות הקלאסיות שנתנה לכם רויטל. הסופרת השנייה שאני נשמע מפיה על ספרה היא ימית ארמבריסטר, שנולדה בקריית גת למשפחה מרוקאית. סבה וסבתה עלו ממרוקו והיו מראשוני העיר קריית גת וממקימיה. היא חיה בארצות הברית מאז סוף שנות ה-90 באריזונה שבארצות הברית עם 3 ילדיה. היא למדה לתארים גבוהים באוניברסיטת בר אילן ובאוניברסיטת מרילנד, וספרה אישה מרוקאית אחת הוא מהספרים שהומלצו על ידי משרד החינוך בישראל כחלק מהכרת המורשת של מה שנקרא עדות ישראל השונות. בבקשה.
Hello. So I'm American, but I'm by blood Moroccan, so I can get really mad and go crazy, and I'm just joking, right? So I was born in a little town in Kiryat Gat in Israel. Both my grandparents from both sides, my father and mother, are from Morocco. And it was really fascinating as a kid because we had to split the Friday night dinners, right, between my mom's side and my dad's side. And my dad's side were the French Moroccans, right? They spoke only French in the house. I've never heard one Moroccan word in that house. They listened to French music. They told stories about Morocco that had nothing to do with Morocco. It had everything to do with France. They went to the French movies. They went to dance to French songs. They were very successful. They had businesses. My grandpa was an accountant in Morocco. My grandma had, at 18-year-old, a business in Morocco of her own. That was not the average Moroccan story that I've heard from the rest of my Moroccan friends, and also from my other side of the family. My mother's side, they came from the villages in Morocco, where they spoke only Moroccan in the house, and my grandma, up until the day she died, never spoke a word in Hebrew. And so it was Moroccan all the way through, with Moroccan music and real authentic Moroccan culture. And it was one Friday, we were the Moroccan friends, and one Friday, we were the real Moroccan. And so, and I never really understood it and the differences between them until I was much older, when I started hearing from other people around me the stigmas about Moroccans, because when you're a child, you're not really aware of a whole lot of it. And when I grew up, I said, oh, are you the French Moroccan? I was like, half. The other half are, I guess, the real Moroccan. I don't know, the barbarian, the primitive, the crazy ones. And the one side was the cultural ones, the one who really knew how to read and write, and in French, and they were the educated and more successful. Much, much later, when I have immigrated to the United States in August of 2000, I think it was the first time in my life that I had to, I guess, figure out what's my identity. Who am I? What am I? I'm an Israeli tzabar. I was born in Israel. I'm a third-generation Israeli. Sorry, Moroccan, from Moroccan descent. But I was born in Israel. My parents were born in Israel. My grandparents both immigrated in 1956 from all sides. All four grandparents immigrated in 1956 to Israel. And now I left the country, and I'm an Israeli tzabar who is married to an American. And I was American by then already, got my citizenship, and I'm also from Moroccan descent. And I try to understand, when I'm going to have children, what am I? Who am I? What am I first? Is the Moroccan blood from my parents is what I should tell everybody I meet? I'm Moroccan? Am I Moroccan? I'm not Moroccan. I wasn't born in Morocco. My grandparents were born in Morocco. Their stories about Morocco were, as fascinating as they were, they didn't really touch me. It was always from a distance. There are grandparents who tell stories from the country that they came from, and you know. But when you grow up and you become a parent, obviously, those stories become very emotional. And the reason they became emotional is because I left the country. And when I left Israel and I came to the United States, very shortly after I left, I realized how much I miss Israel, how much I miss my birthland, how much I miss everything and everyone and everybody. And when I missed my parents and my grandparents, I missed my roots, which were their roots. And I tried to understand the difficulties for the first time that they went through when they actually showed up in Israel in 1956. So my entire childhood, I'm hearing him telling about the ma'abarot and the discrimination and the stories about how hard it was to, you know, start Israel until yada, 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 yada. Okay, all parents, because everybody in Israel are immigrants in one way or another. Yeah, it's from Morocco, but everybody else was from Iraq and Tunisia and Algeria and Yemen and even the Ashkenazi Jews. Everybody came from somewhere. Everybody had a similar, very sad story. And I didn't really hear it as much as I should have as a child. So I went back to Israel and I sat down for the first time about 9 years ago, and I took a video camera and I had my grandma sitting down and I said, I'm listening. Tell me your story. Now I can hear it. I'm older and I want to know. And for 8 hours, between one Moroccan tea with nana, the minty, to another, to cookies, to couscous, to, it was the whole 8 hours, she told me her life story. And it was the first time I realized they left a country. They left a country that wasn't, it's not for nothing. All these stories were extremely meaningful to them. It was her entire culture. It was her language. It was her childhood and her generations and generations of Jews who lived in Morocco for 2,000 years. And between 1950 to 1960, the majority of them are really living in an exodus. They're leaving Morocco. And I think it finally dawned on me how big that was, how meaningful this exodus was actually, that happened is actually important, not only for them, but for my generation as her grandchild, and for my children to know, and even my grandchildren in the future. Here's something that is from the epilogue of the book, and that's something that she told me at the end of the 8 hours, and it's important for me to say. She said, "My last chapter is over. There's no one left in Morocco to ask anything anymore." And she means the Jews of Morocco. "The chapter of the Moroccan Jews is closed and over. We're now maybe a flip in the pages of history. We're Israelis now." And that really hit me, because I realized that not a whole lot of stories were written about that generation. I tried looking, I tried to find if there's anyone who actually wrote a memoir, any story about that time, the 1950s, of that huge exodus of Morocco to Israel and my grandparents' generation. Very little to almost none. One Moroccan Woman, my novel, is the first one that talks about that generation in an historical fiction. And like Revital, my friend, the reason I wrote an historical fiction and not a documentary of my grandma's life is because I didn't really want to tell specifically her life. I wanted the whole world to know about the Moroccan Jews. All of a sudden, it became a mission. I wanted people to know who they were, how long they lived there, what was their traditions, the crazy traditions as well. Everything that had to do with being Moroccan Jew. Now, I am not a very practicing Moroccan Jew by default, but it was important for me not to have that part of history get lost completely over time, because nobody really told that story as it should have been. But I wanted it to be interesting. I wanted it to be fascinating, that you're not sitting and reading an article or a documentary. I wanted my readers to cry their heart out. I wanted tissues after tissues after tissues to be pulled out. I wanted it to be emotional, because I have a flair for a drama. I am not, as you can tell, I can't sit still very much, and I have to have it really vivid and interesting. And so I figured, if I'm going to get my characters a little bit more spicy, a little bit more love, hate, trading, cheating, lying, and the whole 9 yards in a novel, a lot more people will probably read it, which is an actual truth in my case. So what I've done is I've researched for 4 years about the Moroccan Jews. And the reason I had to do it because I didn't know a whole lot about the Moroccan Jews. All I knew is that we go crazy in weddings and china. I knew that we stand on tables and we go nuts, and that we have great food. It's really tasty. It's a little spicy. I knew that we go with the, and Sarit, and we're all happy most of the time, and we make good cookies in the mimuna, and that's pretty much was it. I didn't know anything about the history of my grandparents. So I read that huge book that, I don't know how many of you heard the name Chaim Zafrani, Dr. Chaim Zafrani. I finally found it, 2,000 Years of Jewish Life in Morocco. And when I ordered it from Amazon and I looked at it and I started reading the first chapter, I was like, oh my God, it's going to be horrible, because it's a documentary and I'm not really good at reading documentary. I need it to be spicy. So it took me 4 years to really go through it and to start interviewing my family, interviewing friends, going back to my hometown, Kiryat Gat, and trying to find out what happened on those first few years in that little town. My grandma and grandpa were promised the world, like almost everybody else. They were coming to the land of milk and honey, and they're going to have a wonderful life. And when they showed up in the Haifa port with the boat, they said that they're going to go to a gorgeous, beautiful town named Kiryat Gat, and they're going to start a brand new life there. And my grandma asked how far it is from Tel Aviv, and they said about 20 minutes by bicycle. So they bought a bicycle. And they literally showed up to nothing, completely nothing but 18 shacks. One of the shacks is the cover of my novel. That's one of the shacks. And 18 shacks in the middle of the night, just like Dr. Avi Picard, right? So all the photos that you have showed, I have 200 of those photos of Kiryat Gat alone that I borrowed from the archives of the city of Kiryat Gat exactly 5 weeks ago. And so it's remarkable. They show up in the middle of the night to 18 shacks with no windows or doors in January 1956 with babies, little children, obviously, old people in trucks, and a couple of suitcases that are carrying over to those shacks, and here you go. That's beautiful Kiryat Gat for you. And then in the 1970s, much later, they're interviewing my grandma to one of those archive shows that they've made for the Israeli television about the first early days of Kiryat Gat. And since my grandma and grandpa were one of the first 18 families who were dumped in nothing but 18 shacks, they're being interviewed. But that's the grandma who's French. And she's like, you know, yeah, they told us that we're going to go to a beautiful city, and we said that. And I'm thinking, like, why aren't you telling them that they dumped you in this place when they promised you the land of milk and honey, right? I mean, why are you keeping this noble, you know, façon in an Israeli term? Because that's how it was. She said, they told us there is going to be a beautiful city, and we believed them. And my grandpa said they were expecting us to work the land, but I was an accountant, and I wasn't sure how I was supposed to work the land, by the way, with, you know, what Dr. Avi showed, when I didn't know to do anything but write numbers in books. But I've learned to work in Solel Bonnet, and I've learned to do everything that I was supposed to do. So I'll jump a little bit further, and I'll say that what I do now is I go, just like Revital, all over the United States, just about twice a month, and I give lectures about the history of the Moroccan Jews, not as an historian, because I can't take that accreditation, but because I've researched it for 4 years, I can, and I reference everything that I say, and that I do. I tell the history of the Moroccan Jews, but through the eyes of one remarkable Moroccan woman. But the readers that I go and I talk to keep asking me the same 3 questions, and that's what I want to share with you. One of them is what made me a second generation Israeli tzabar, and a third generation, a Moroccan family, write about Morocco, a country that I've never visited and have no sentimental ties to. So one of the beautiful things that I get is emails and text messages from readers, because it's a fiction and people like to, you know, write and tell you that they like the story. And they ask me, and they always tell me, it is so obvious and amazing to know that you have, it's obvious that you've been in Morocco and you visited and you've seen it all. I've never been in Morocco, not yet. And the descriptions of the smells of the souks and the spices and every little description and details come from my imagination, how I imagine Morocco to be like, from pictures and photos that I watched in the internet and that I Googled, and from the photos that my grandparents has in their boxes at home. And so I've never been to Morocco. I hope that one day I will, but I'm not sure that I will be there. My grandma said that she has no desire to ever step foot in that country ever again. And I know that a lot of people go to Morocco. A lot of people from Morocco went to go back to see where their house was, where the market was, where the rabbis that they admired were buried. Her parents are buried in Morocco, just maybe to go visit her parents' graves. And she said that there is just too many painful memories to go see and visit, and that the day that she left, she realized that nobody will ever light a candle at her grandmother's grave anymore, and that anyway, there was nobody left to even ask to do that for her. And by the time was right and she could have gone, she already gave up that idea and she never wanted to go back. So maybe one day I'll go and try to find those graves. Other people ask me what inspired me from my faraway life in North America, in Arizona, to write the Moroccan Jews. I think I've answered that question. And if I see myself as a Moroccan Jew, do I personally keep any Moroccan traditions in my everyday life in Arizona, or as a third-generation Moroccan Jew? I met my husband in Israel at Intel in Kiryat Gat. So that little 18 shacks little town became a very, very successful town, in my opinion. Intel, which is one of the obviously most known high-tech companies in the world, is in there. And when I was a student, I went to work there as a security guard while I was doing my BA in Ashkelon Academic College. And thinking about how life has a crazy way of, I've never thought I'm going to write a novel. I didn't learn literature. I went to learn criminology in 1997 in Ashkelon because it's close to Kiryat Gat. And here I am now in something that I've never even imagined that could have happened. So that's pretty remarkable. But I met my husband in Intel, in Israel. And he's American. And I never thought that I'm a very traditional Moroccan person. Well, I ended up finding, and that's before I wrote this novel and before I interviewed my grandmother and so forth, I found myself having my American husband wearing a jalabia, a red tarbush, and having a full-scale china with changing the outfits 3 times and sitting on those, and that carriage that some professor showed, the Muslim versus the Israeli Moroccan today. I did it to him. And the china on the hands, and kululu, and the entire 9 yards he had to go through when he married me. What's amazing about that, in my opinion, is that perhaps because he's American and he never had any prejudices, never had any stigmas about Moroccans, he's not an Israeli to have a stigma about the Moroccan Jews versus the Ashkenazis, the Yamins, he never saw anything absolutely crazy or weird. He thought that this, crazy Jewish, who knows what he thought. He just thought, okay, I'm going to do whatever she does. They're all nuts anyway. But he didn't, specifically said she's nuts because she's Moroccan. Because that's what these people in this country probably all doing when they get married. So we did do a full-scale china, and I live in Arizona, and I make it a point to have a mimuna every year. And I don't open my door because that would be really not Americanized thing to do. And just, the neighbors would think that I lost my mind. But I do let close friends know, and they can all come. Or I go to someone else who have a mimuna, so that's important for me. And I do use, whether I want to or not, a lot of Moroccan slang in my everyday life. And although I didn't hear a lot of Moroccan on my everyday life in Israel when I grew up, my Hebrew is adorned with a lot of Moroccan slang. So I can definitely call my husband, Kapara, come here for a second. Or it's such a schunia delmut today because it's really a hot day. And things of that sort do come out of my mouth because I've heard them in my childhood, and they just tend to come on in emotional moments of being Moroccan. Other than that, I hope that if you ever read One Moroccan Woman, you will enjoy it. I wanted to add that what's amazing me is that most of my readers are not Moroccan Jews. It's extremely surprising. I thought, to me, it was extremely surprising. I thought that it's probably going to be one of the first audience who's going to want to read the story because it's their story. No. The vast majority of all the sales of the book comes from non-Jews in the United States, non-Jews at all in the United States, which is my highest sales on Amazon, and I had to understand why. So when I go to non-Jews lectures, which is most of my lectures, I ask them, why did you invite me? And they want to, like Revital said, they're a little bit shocked that there were Jews in Morocco to begin with. Literally, they're very much, obviously they are supporting Israel. They're big supporters of Israel. And they think, oh, she's Jewish, she's lecturing about something to do with Judaism. Sounds interesting, let her have her come for an hour and a half and talk. And then they realize, then I find myself as an ambassador telling the whole story of Jews from the Arab lands, and particularly Jews of Morocco, which is amazing. And the other Jews who invite me are Ashkenazi Jews, and which is great because I can tell a little bit more about Moroccan Jews to Ashkenazi Jews and kind of make a little bit of order in what they know and what they don't know and all the stigmas that do exist in Israel, which is a really nice thing to do. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for inviting me.
בעקבות אריסטו, שהעדיף סופרים על היסטוריונים, ואני מקווה שההיסטוריונים שביניכם לא יקטלו אותי, אפשר להגיד, בעקבות הדברים ששמענו ועוד נשמע, שגדול כוחו של הדמיון מכוחה של המציאות. וכעת לדוברת השלישית ברשימה, שרית גרדוול, סופרת ממוצא תימני שנולדה בפרדס חנה וחיה בשיקגו עם משפחתה. שרית היא בעלת תוארי קולנוע וטלוויזיה ועבודה סוציאלית מאוניברסיטת תל אביב, והרומן הביקורים שלה שהוא נושא הכנס כאן, ספרי תמה תמימה, יצא לאור בהוצאת פרדס בשנת 2014. כמו כן פרסמה שני סיפורים קצרים בהדור, שבועון עברי בעריכתו של ידידי לב חקק שהקדשתי לו את הרצאתי, שהוא לצערי הרב כתב העת העברי האחרון בארצות הברית, והייתי יכולה לתת לכם שתי הרצאות על כתבי העת העבריים בארצות הברית בראשית המאה ה-20, ונשארנו עם אחד שמתנדנד ויוצא לאור פעם אחת בשנה. בבקשה.
Hello. First, thank you for inviting me here to this very important convention. I'm very happy to be here and to push the Yemeni story, which I didn't hear enough, but I'm sure it was in others. So first, my name is Sarit Gradwohl. This is my first novel, and it's called Sapri Tamat Mima, or in Yemeni traditional, it's Sapri Tamima. But in English, it's A Tale of Love and Innocence. It's right now it's only in Hebrew, and I'm working on the translation to English. Today I'm going to tell you what led me, a citizen and a resident of the U.S., write about Yemenite Jewry and the process of writing what I did to my identity as a Yemenite Jewry, and about the feedback I got from Jews from North America. So first, what this book is about. A Tale of Love and Innocence is an historical novel based on my grandparents' lives. When I wrote it, I didn't thought I'm going to teach everybody about Yemeni Jews. I think about it now, but I only wanted to make my grandpa live forever. So it's based on my grandparents' lives, and this is their photo. They are very nice. And it starts in a little village in Yemen where they live under the rule of the Imam and the Sharia laws. And my grandfather grew up in my grandmother's house. They were cousins. He lived there after his parents died. And they were very good friends. And this friendship became even greater love. And when I introduced the book in front of people, I always say that first it's a love story. It's a 77 years love story that starts when they are kids, and they have all these adventures in this little village in Yemen. And later on, Hassan, the hero, based on my grandfather, he has a dream to go to the land of Israel, and he excited Hamama with his dream, and she is forced to examine her life in Yemen. And on the one hand, it's not very bad. Of course, they're poor, but everybody else is also, and they have a good relationship with the Muslim neighbors. On the other hand, she's almost 6, and she already needs to find a match. About that match, she always ran away from home, and it's a lot of adventures and funny stories that I will leave you to read, but in the end, they decided to marry Hassan and Hamama, and the love grew. And after a lot of adventures and moving from one village to another, they still across the border to Aden, and then under British control. And after that, they set sail and ended up in a transit camp in Atlit. And after that, they settled in Pardes Chana. The book is actually from the 1930s until the Yom Kippur War in Israel. And while the book tells the story of their past, it goes back and forth between that past and the present, in which I write about my meetings with my grandparents and watch my grandfather, the courageous and admired hero, confined to a wheelchair, wrapped in a diaper and hardly talking. So what led me to write this story? My bond with my maternal grandparents was always very close. We lived nearby. We went there every Shabbat, having lunch and eating the jachnan with the tomato sauce and eggs. And my mother worked shifts, and my father came home at 5. So every day after school, I went to their house, and it was my second home. I cleaned their house. I chopped the very small salad like they love. I helped with the chores, and I sat under the shady eucalyptus tree and read a lot of books. And from now and then, they would tell me stories about their past, and I believe that my love for stories came from them, and it's only fitting that my first published novel will be about them. So what led me to write this story? When my grandfather's health started to deteriorate, my cousin said, "You write, don't you? So why don't you write their life story before it's too late?" I came visiting them once a week, armed with my video camera, and documenting their story, their life story. At that point, my grandfather was very ill and hardly spoke. So it became that most of the story is based on my grandmother's point of view. This is why I also call the book Sarit Amat Mima. This is her story, her innocence. The Sarit Amat Mima is actually a name of a piyut by Rabbi Saadia ben Amram. He wrote it about the Shekhinah, the divine presence, but I use the literal meaning of the Sarit Amat Mima. This is her story, her innocent and pure-hearted story. In short, my work on the book started while I still lived in Israel, and the initial purpose was to document my grandparents' story before it's too late. But what happened now? The process of writing in the diaspora. Most of the work on the book, the transcribing the interviews, setting the different parts of the story in order, a lot of research about Yemenite Jewry, about their life in Yemen, all the journey to Israel, their part in the Zionism enterprise. a lot of writing, rewriting, and editing I did while living in Skokie. Writing about my grandparents' home was therapeutic, a way to deal with the fact that I missed my home and I missed my family and my life in Israel. When I left Israel and I said goodbye to my grandfather, I knew I'm not going to see him again. But writing about his life made him present in my life long after he passed away. Working on the book also helped me keep in touch with my grandmother, since I always had more questions for her. Just lately I discovered that the recipe for the jachnun I wrote in the book had a mistake. It's already out there, but I called her again. Now that the book is published, I'm always very happy to hear that after people read it, they want to meet her and they go to visit her. And I like to hear that relatives come now and then and read her from the book. And so I feel that at least, even though I left her behind, I didn't leave her alone. In addition to the therapeutic effects of the writing process, the historical research I did, because of the book and the related lectures, also led to a large change in how I see my own Yemeni identity. As a kid, I never really cared. I wasn't connected with my Yemeni identity. It always was in the background with the food and the music. And even when I went to shul, when I started being religious, I went first to an Ashkenazi synagogue for prayers and only later to a Yemeni one. My research and study of the history of Yemenite Jewry, their rich lives, their good neighborly relations with the Muslim, their pure, innocent faith in God, their immigration to Israel and part in the Zionist enterprise, all this excited me and drew me closer to the culture from which I came. I felt pride in belonging to the third generation of Israelis of Yemeni descent. The United States, of all places, far away from Pardes Chana and the Yemeni neighborhood in which I grew, is where I found my Yemeni identity. Could this process have happened also in Israel? Or was the distance necessary? Honestly, I don't know. On the one hand, I can see how the distance made me want to feel connected. On the other hand, I may be just a little part of a larger awakening of third generation. I see this awakening both in other cultures through books based on authors' grandparents' stories. It's very common now. There's a lot of books like that, and it's good. But I also see it among Yemenis in Israel with the awakening of new artists, such as the poet Adi Kesar, who challenges the Hebrew poetry establishment with her project Ars Poetica. Another example is the Day of Remembrance and Awareness of the Yemenite Children Affair, held on June 21st. It's the day of passing of Rabbi Uzi Meshulam, in which the third generation gives a stage and lends an ear to all the stories that have were silenced for years. As part of this awakening, I see a lot of interest in the subject of the book here in North America, and I wanted to share some of the feedbacks that I got. I got to talk a lot about the book, mostly in Chicago, in which I live there. I talked in the Hebrew Book Week in my kids' school, in Yemenite Chafla of Israel Inc. organization, book clubs, and I can tell you that I received a lot of feedback from many people, and not only from Yemeni descent. People seemed connected to my book out of the same longing for the grandparents' home, for the smells, the food, and the very special connection between grandparents and their children, in which, you know, Dr. Nurit just said that before, that maybe we should research the Safta. It's very important. Another feedback was, like my colleague said before, is an interest in new knowledge about the history of Yemenite Jewry, as this is not usually covered in a typical curriculum in school. Just the other day, a teacher came to me and told me, she asked me if I can come to her class and talk about the Yemeni immigration to Israel, because her class learned about immigration to Israel, but only from Europe. So I gladly said yes. In addition, many readers are interested in the period of Israel creation, the Zionism expressed in the book, through the many struggles my grandparents faced, their dream to work the land, their ability to finish each each workday with blisters and thorns, but still be happy as they return to their home in a tent. They had tents, not like Kiryat Gat. And they liked it. They liked it. In the book, they were very happy. It was actually the first time they were able to be alone in a tent and not in this huge tzrif in Atlit. They had their privacy. So people like to remember these days. I can understand this longing for the ideals of Zionism, especially from my seat so far away. After all, we were also educated along these ideals, but then, what are we doing here? Towards the end of the book, I found some comfort in words my grandfather, may he rest in peace, said to my cousin, who left many years before. I'm going to read, it's a temporary translation from Hebrew. I watched an old video in which Grandpa speaks with Etty, his first grandchild, who had left the United States many years earlier. Grandpa, tell Etty how much you miss her, my sister's voice is heard in the background. Grandpa is sitting atop his very high bed in the old room. Above are bookshelves covered in dust, and across him a reading desk. On top of the desk, I spot the white powdery mint candies that I always loved. I miss you, he says. Etty left many years ago, and because she lived illegally in the US, she couldn't come back to visit. If she were to return to Israel, it would be permanently. Tell her to come back, my sister says. Why should she come back? What does she have here? There's no work. She should stay there where there is, Grandpa answers. I stop the film. It's the disappointment. Not because of Atlit, a temporary challenge, the pain of Aliyah, the pains of labor leading to Israel's birth. Now that Grandpa has grown old and seen his family expand and struggle in vain to secure their livelihood in place that he'd chosen to live, now is the disappointment. To summarize, I wrote my first novel out of love and desire to document my grandparents' lives. Most of the writing process took place in North America and helped me feel closer to my family and my past that I have left behind. Learning about the history of Yemenite Jewry brought me closer to my Yemeni identity and made up for the Israeliness I left behind when I moved here. I find that a lot of people connect with the book out of longing for the ideals of Zionism of the past, where the sacrifice was hard, but done for the greater good, like Dan Eluz. Alas, today, for some people in Israel, life is more about surviving. Thank you.
לפני שאני אתן את רשות הדיבור לשאלות של הקהל, לשלוש הסופרות, אני רוצה לתקן טעות. כמובן ששם הספר הוא ספרי תמה תמימה, ואם אני לא טועה, יש לזה מנגינה, ואם אני לא טועה, אז להקת ענבל בראשותה של שרה לוי תנאי, יצרה ריקוד לפי זה, ואני שומעת אותו. שרה לוי תנאי הייתה ידידה של אבא שלי, ישראל כהן, וגם אם אנחנו מדברים על תימנים, אז גם מרדכי טביב היה ידיד שלו, מבאי ביתנו, וגם כתבתי עליו, ואני חושבת עכשיו שהחזרתי את הניסוח לתקנו, אני נזכרת בריקוד הזה, ואני לא 100% בטוחה, אבל אני שומעת את זה, אני חושבת, לפחות מהרהורי ליבי. ראיתם דוגמה של 3 סופרות, נשים מאורגנות, מסודרות, אמרו את דבריהם בזמן ולא ביקשו תוספת, ועכשיו יש לכם אפשרות להפנות את השאלות אליהן. בבקשה.
Thank you so much for this great session and for sharing with us this marvelous experience. So as we need to ask questions, I'm wondering why you picked up your grandparents. Because I can understand that the nostalgia and maybe the roots are more vivid with the grandparents. But what about your parents? What happened to them? Did they convey any of this spirit or culture or whatever? And again, the second thing is, what about your children, if you have any? Or the way you see that you might transmit, and what will you transmit? Because my experience with my daughter was very interesting. I was always talking about my grandmother, etc. I went back to Morocco to see my grandfather's house. We made pictures, and I'll even give a talk in Venice, like in 3 months, about what happened to his house. And of course, the memories of the grandparents are very, very, very vivid. But with my daughter, what happened was that she really started connecting with her Moroccan identities through me. My husband is not Moroccan. And she really showed me several things that I had been working on, but I was not at all aware. And even this idea of a traumatic memory that I had been working with lately was really her view of my own story, the way she was living my own story through what I was representing for her. So I'm really curious about that. Thank you so much.
As far as my parents go, I really skipped that generation because they're a generation. It's almost like the Holocaust survivors. I'm sorry, I'm giving that a comparison, but you have the grandparents' generation who actually went through the horrors. You have the second generations which are kind of falling in between the chairs, and then the third generation, which would be just like me, who come out, want to know, ask a lot of questions, forcing the grandparents to sit down and tell the stories. We're ignoring the fact that if they don't want to talk about it, we push them to talk about it because we want to. My parents, basically, I'm third generation from Moroccan descent, but I'm a first generation of being educated and vocal and with a lot more confidence. And I can stand up and demand more from society than what my parents could, because they didn't have that courage just yet to do it, in my opinion. And so this is as far as why my parents' generation kind of got skipped. My children, they're obviously a little bit Moroccan from my side. They're Israeli from my side, which is a lot of things. And they're American, and they have, from an American, they're Scandinavian and Norwegian and German. And so try to put that into a child, and it's not very easy, period. We're living in a world where it's difficult as it is when you have so many things combined. So what I do is I try to be Moroccan on Fridays in America, and I put Mizrahi music in full volume while I'm cooking Moroccan fish, and I hope that it's going to kind of sink in a little bit.
I wrote about my grandparents, first because I wanted to document their life story before it's too late, and because they had a big journey and interesting, but I think it's even more complicated to write about your mother. You know, I think I will get there someday, and it will be very dangerous zone. And about my kids, they know they're half Ashkenaz, half Yemeni, but it's not a conversation in the house. It's just happened because of the book, and because people talk about the book, and because my kid teacher is a Yemeni descent, and she was very happy with the book and bought several of them and start giving them as present. And she always talked in the class about it. So my kid got very proud. So now she knows she's Yemeni. But other than that, there's the food, but we don't talk about it yet. They are very young.
I really enjoy, in the beginning I thought, you know, okay, as an historian, literature seems not really serious stuff, but then I was surprised I think, you know, I was really impressed, and I think all three of you, represent a phenomenon we historian or sociological call the third generation coming back theory, saying that the grandparents was shocked by the immigration. The second generation was trying to forget or to hide their identity. And the third generation is coming up proud with the identity that was hid for years I say that they were out of the closet. And that's, I think it's interesting, y'all, all three of you carrying Ashkenazic or European names. You know, when an Ashkenaz and Mizrahi men married Sephardic, sorry, when Mizrahi men married Ashkenazi women, we call it Kiddush Levana. I don't know how you call it the other way around, but I think it's really interesting that you present a kind of a generation. As an historian, I use literature, but not your kind of literature, and I will tell you why. Because Yamit mentioned that there is no literature about Moroccan immigrants. There is, but a little. There is Uziel Chazan wrote 9 books.
Historical fictions?
Yes.
Wow.
Uziel Chazan, 9 books, that historical fiction.
Yes.
There is Meir Naorai Shitrit, his son is very famous, but he also writes some books. But interestingly enough, Morocco was the biggest community, but literature are more about Iraqi Jews, all Sifrut HaMa'abara, and Yemenite Jews of Aliyah Rishona and Shniya. And I think you gave a very important contribution to this shell. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was very interesting. There are 2 comments I want to make, and one is that there is a phenomenal Canadian author of Israeli Yemenite origin. Her name is Ayelet Sabari. Have you heard of her? Have any of the 3 of you heard of her?
No.
Well, she is going to be on the world stage because the quality of her writing is phenomenal. It's interesting that living here in Canada, she's been here for a few years now, and when she came, her English was very so-so, and now she's a master of English, of course. She's a wordsmith, among other things. She has said that the distance has allowed her to get closer to her Yemeni origins, not to her Israeli origins, but to her Yemeni origins. As a reader, I see a lot of the Israeli mindset, the Israeli attitudes and approaches to things in her writing. But she sees herself as being culturally much more Yemeni. I'd like you to look her up. She'll be quite an eye-opener. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that this is specifically to, I'm sorry, I don't know your name,
Sarit.
I can't remember it, if I was exposed to it, to the young lady who spoke
Sarit.
about Morocco.
Sarit.
Okay.
Yamit.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't hear one, sorry.
I know.
All right, so I found it interesting that as soon as you started speaking, you said some rather, threw out a few adjectives that were rather disparaging towards Moroccans. And later on, you salted, you peppered your speech with a few little disparaging adjectives again. Now, living here in Montreal, where there is a rather large Moroccan Jewish community, I have not been exposed to that particular, I don't know, perspective of seeing Moroccans. So I don't know if that's, not generally, I don't, and I have been quite close to a rather large group of Moroccans, having taught in a Moroccan Jewish school, high school, and where the majority of students were polite and ambitious and succeeded very well. So, and I find that when we have a Moroccan guest that comes from Israel, the Moroccan guest, or half Moroccan, the guest will always say, well, My mother's family, or my grandmother's family was Hungarian, but my grandfather's family was Moroccan, you know, primitive. You know, it just, and I am not from Morocco, but it really, really bothers me that this is an accepted, you know, attitude. For all that those people know, the Ashkenazi side may not even have had running water if they came from a little village. We don't know. But in any case, there is a certain given, it seems to me, that a lot of the Moroccan Israelis come up with. Often they don't even mention that they've changed their name. So I think it's time that there should be a pride in what I think is a very rich heritage. You mentioned the food. There's also the liturgy, the music, the melodies, the poetry. There is a celebration of life that is part of the whole Moroccan Jewish approach and contribution. And I think there should be a pride rather than this disparaging.
So let me answer it in one sentence because we don't have much time.
No, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I write it in the last page of my novel, and I write how extremely proud I am of being part of a Moroccan heritage. And the slang that you were, not slang, it's part of the Moroccan actually language that I was spicing here or there. I grew up in Kiryat Gat, which started as a Moroccan little town, right? So everybody in the first few years who showed up in town miraculously were Moroccans, right? Later on, one of my Ashkenazi friends from Kiryat Gat who showed up in other aliyot, when they started to bring more Eastern European Jews, told me that we're completely out of our minds thinking that Moroccans were discriminated because she was extremely discriminated in Kiryat Gat, being one of the few Ashkenazis in town. And so I guess it's all relative to where you grew up and what was your experiences as a child. But yes, growing up in Kiryat Gat with a majority of Moroccans, it was safe to speak with a lot of Moroccan slang and not feel that it's either primitive or, you know, in any way
But
not...
I think it's their attitude towards themselves. I feel that.
No, it came from
there's
others. The Moroccans never felt that they were primitive until they were told that they're Arabs and barbarians and so forth. But...
and they swallowed it.
Right.
תודה רבה לכל השומעים. אנחנו...
It's a very short question for Sarit, please. I am interested, no. I'm interested in knowing if your grandparents embellished their past in Yemen the way Moroccans did, for instance. And if they had any nostalgia towards a country named Yemen.
Yes, they had nostalgia, they had good memories, they have very good neighbors. It was hard living there. They were poor, but everybody were poor. They worked very hard. And they had their interaction with the soldier that was bad. And in the book, there's a curious story that the Yemeni soldier wanted to hurt the family, but when the neighbors saw them coming, he came and told them, come quickly to my house, and I'll go into your house until you ran away. He actually saved their lives. So they have good memories, but they know they have nothing to come back to. They lived in a very small village, and right now there's like very few families only in Sana'a.
Thank you.
תודה רבה לכולם. תמיד טוב לסיים עם טעם של עוד ולא עם טעם של נמאס. תודה.